He was humiliated as a thief, searched, and mocked. All because he was black. No one knew they were facing the new CEO. What happened next will surprise even the most hardened cynics. But let's start from the beginning. Michael Williams, a sophisticated middle-aged black man, stepped into the expansive, glass and marble-laden Grand Market shopping center for the first time. Massive signs, perfectly arranged merchandise, and the steady hum of shoppers' footsteps created an atmosphere of a thriving business. Just a week ago, the board of directors had officially appointed him as the new CEO of the entire retail chain. But instead of making a grand announcement, Michael decided to see the reality from the inside, unfiltered and unpolished. He deliberately dressed down, dark jeans, a loose white shirt, and a worn leather jacket. His expensive watch and designer accessories stayed home. He wanted to be anonymous, just an ordinary customer, to understand how the store operated for everyone, not just privileged shoppers. As he passed the sportswear section, Michael noticed a clerk happily assisting a young white couple, helping them pick out the perfect sneakers. When a teenager with African braids approached, the same saleswoman suddenly buried her face in her phone, pretending not to notice him. The teenager glanced around, sighed, and left. Michael's eyes narrowed, but he kept walking. In the perfume department, the discrimination was even more blatant. A young black woman with a child in her arms searched in vain for assistance. Two employees stood nearby, discussing their evening plans, acting as though she didn't exist. When the woman hesitantly approached them, one of the girls lazily said, "Just look for yourself. Everything's on the shelves." The same scenarios repeated again and again. Smiles and courtesy for some, suspicion and coldness for others. Michael felt his anger simmering, but kept his composure, continuing to observe. Stopping by the luxury accessories section, he paused at a display of watches. The shelf glimmered with gold and silver timepieces, each priced like a small car. One particular piece caught his eye, a classic watch with an intricate mechanism, inlaid with sapphires. He leaned down and carefully picked it up to take a closer look. The metal was cold and heavy in his hand. Michael smirked slightly, appreciating the craftsmanship. At that moment he felt a chill run down his spine, a gaze, sharp as a knife. Slowly raising his eyes, he saw the reflection in the display glass, a security guard in a black uniform, watching him intently. "Is something wrong?" Michael asked softly, turning around. The guard, a tall man with harsh features and a name badge reading Stephen Hoffman, scanned him with a look full of disdain and suspicion. His right hand nervously reached for his radio, his lips tightening into a thin line. "Just making sure no one decides to take a souvenir," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. At that moment, Michael realized the situation was on the brink of spiraling out of control. He took a deep breath, suppressing his anger. "Let's see how far they'll go," he thought. "Hey, you! Put the watch back!" Stephen barked, his voice cracking like a whip through the silence of the department. The words were so loud that people within earshot turned their heads, forming an invisible circle of attention. The air grew tense. Michael, maintaining outward calm, looked at the guard, not rushing to comply with his demand. He carefully returned the watch to the display, his fingers lingering on the cold metal as though bidding farewell to an item that had unexpectedly become a symbol of something far greater. A spark of disbelief flickered in Michael's eyes, but he kept his voice steady. "I just wanted to take a closer look," he said quietly. "Is that forbidden?" Stephen stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the polished tile. Now, only a foot separated them. Stephen was tall and broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and restless eyes. He looked at Michael as though he were trash to be discarded. "Don't get smart with me, got it?" Stephen's voice vibrated with barely controlled anger. "I see guys like you every day. Think you can just walk in here and take whatever you want? Empty your pockets." The demand landed like a sentence. Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine, a lump tightening in his chest. Several customers froze, their eyes darting between Michael and the guard. The murmurs grew like a rising tide. "Did he steal something?" whispered a middle-aged woman nearby, her eyes full of judgment. "They're all the same," muttered a man in a suit, shaking his head. The words cut deep. Michael's anger swelled, but he controlled his breathing. How many times had he witnessed this? How often had he heard friends and colleagues share similar stories of humiliation? But now it was happening to him, the CEO of the company that owned this store. "I don't have to show you anything," Michael said firmly, his voice cold as steel. These words, spoken with dignity, poured fuel on the fire. Stephen's face contorted with rage, his nostrils flaring, jaw tightening. He stepped forward, gripping Michael's arm so hard his knuckles turned white. "Still trying to act smart, huh?" he hissed, his face inches from Michael's. "You're coming with me, and we'll find out exactly who you are." Yanking Michael forward, Stephen dragged him toward a staff door. Michael felt the weight of the stairs drilling into his back. Suspicion, fear, and above all, indifference. No one intervened. No one spoke up. "Maybe he did steal something," someone's voice muttered, full of doubt and prejudice. "Better stay out of it," whispered an elderly woman, clutching her purse tightly. Michael clenched his teeth, his footsteps heavy against the glossy floor. He heard the whispers, felt the vibration of his own anger. Each step amplified the humiliation, but also his resolve. He could have revealed his identity at any moment, shown his documents, and the situation would have ended instantly. But he wanted to let this play out, to see how far the system would allow someone like Stephen to go, to ensure no one could later say, "You're exaggerating." The staff door slammed behind them, sealing them in a gray corridor, away from prying eyes. Stephen shoved Michael into a cold, dimly lit staff room. The iron door clicked shut, leaving the shopping center's hum behind. The gray walls, peeling paint, and a single table with a chair made it feel like an interrogation room. Breathing heavily, Stephen lifted his radio to his lips. "Calling the police. Suspected theft. Urgent." Michael stood, leaning against the wall, his fists clenched. His eyes, dark and piercing, bored into Stephen. But there was no fear, just controlled fury. Seconds dragged painfully. The muffled noise of the mall contrasted sharply with the suffocating silence inside. A few minutes later, the door swung open. 2 uniformed police officers entered, young and confident. One, a wiry blonde with a sharp gaze, looked Michael up and down with disdain. "What's going on here?" he asked lazily. "Caught him red-handed," Stephen announced proudly. "Thought he could steal a pricey watch and walk away." The officers exchanged glances and approached Michael. Without asking permission, one officer roughly grabbed his shoulder, turning him to face the wall. "Hands against the wall. Spread your legs," he commanded coldly. "This is a misunderstanding. You can't—" Michael began, but a harsh shove cut him off. The officers frisked him roughly and unceremoniously, hands patting his sides, legs, and pockets. Michael clenched his teeth, his heart pounding with rage and humiliation. An inner voice screamed, "Tell them who you are! End this now!" But he stayed silent, let the truth surface on its own. "Just another loser trying to steal an expensive watch," the blonde officer sneered, stepping back. "Think you're so clever?" Stephen nodded smugly, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Now you're gonna pay for it," he snarled. "You picked the wrong store and the wrong guard." He leaned in, face to face with Michael, eyes brimming with contempt and confidence. "You chose poorly." At that moment, the staff room door burst open, slamming into the wall. The store manager rushed in, pale as a ghost, holding a printout. A corporate photo of Michael, smiling against an official backdrop. "Stephen, what have you done?" The manager's voice trembled with panic. "This is Michael Williams, our new CEO." The room froze. The air thickened, as though filled with smoke. Stephen's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands, which had just gripped Michael, now hung limply by his sides. What? He's the CEO?" Stephen whispered, his voice cracking. The blonde officer, who'd mocked Michael moments before, stepped back, eyes wide with horror. The other officer turned away, as though hoping to undo reality by not looking. Michael turned slowly, his gaze icy as the Arctic. He looked at Stephen and the officers, as though they were beneath contempt. The room filled with a heavy, oppressive silence. "You had the chance to show basic human respect and common sense," Michael said calmly, "but you chose otherwise." His voice was quiet, but each word struck like a hammer. Michael straightened up, his gaze cold and resolute. He looked directly into Stephen's eyes, who now seemed much smaller and weaker than he had just moments ago. The guard's face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, his hands trembling uselessly at his sides. All his confidence had evaporated, leaving only fear and confusion. "You judge people by how they look, by the color of their skin." Michael's voice was calm but carried a steely edge. "You humiliate them, thinking you can get away with it. But today, that ends." The room seemed to shrink around them, every sound sharpened with unusual clarity. The police officers exchanged glances, their faces burning with shame. The blonde officer swallowed hard and, avoiding Michael's gaze, muttered, "Mr. Williams, we apologize." Both officers quickly exited the room, not daring to look back. The door closed behind them with a dull thud. Stephen was left standing alone, like a child caught in the act of wrongdoing. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darted to the floor, searching for salvation that wasn't there. "Mr. Williams, please, forgive me. I didn't mean—" His voice trembled, the words trailing off. Michael took a step forward, his shadow falling over Stephen, a silent reminder of the weight of his actions. "No, you meant to," Michael replied firmly. "You wanted to humiliate me because you thought you could, but that doesn't matter anymore. I won't let anyone else experience what I just did." Stephen's head bowed even lower, his face flushed with shame. It was as if the last drops of his confidence had drained away, leaving him hollow. "You're fired," Michael said clearly and loudly, sealing the fate of the story. "And starting today, mandatory bias and anti-discrimination training will be implemented throughout the entire chain. No one will feel like a second-class citizen in our stores ever again." Stephen nodded weakly, ready to accept any punishment. Michael turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a man whose life had just crumbled under the weight of his own prejudice.